Well, I was born out here where I still live, between here and Benjamin, on my dad's ranch, not a big ranch. And but anyway, there's 4 of us boys, and Mother and Daddy raised us 4 boys. They didn't have much money. Daddy bought that ranch, and he didn't have much money. He had to worked hard, and us boys worked hard, but he didn't overdo it. But we all had to work, cowboyed and did everything, not just cowboyed, but well, like screwworms, we helped doctor screwworms, but anyway, we went along there, and then I graduated from high school in '64, and I came up here and worked for the 60s for 3 years. And back then, the 60s, different now, but back then the cattle were wild, and the brush was thick, and the horses all bucked, so I liked all that. That's just right down my alley. But then my mother wanted us boys to go to school, so I went to Alpine. And they're still having screwworms then. It's sort of on the end of it. But I remember doctoring a few down there, not many. It's right on the end of it. They were dropping flies in cartons, you know. But I stayed down there, and I day worked a lot more than I studied. So I didn't get much education. But I come home with a good woman. She was a dandy. She died from cancer. But anyway, we moved there. My dad and mother, when they first married, they lived in town, and Daddy talked her, the ranch that had an old house, wasn't much. Daddy talked her to going out and staying one winter while he was feeding. 29 years later, they moved back to town. My mother said it's sort of a breach of contract. And anyway, I've been pretty well been there ever since then, and I like it. I like being a cowboy. That's all I've ever done, all I've ever thought about. And sat on a horse a good part of my life, and I like that. And just like Boots, but he sat on one longer than me. And anyway, that's sort of my story. I married another girl. She was raised on the Wagner Ranch, and she died of cancer. So I've had hard luck, but I tell people, a lot of people don't get one good wife, and I've had 2, so I don't have much to bellyache about. But I do miss them. Yeah. But anyway, that's sort of how my deal went.
I grew up on a ranch in the panhandle of Texas. We lived there and worked for a number of years. This is in the 30s and 40s and I remember as a little kid in the 30s, my dad and them leaving out horseback day in, day out, doctoring worms, you know, and I migrated out of school and went to work for the JAs and worked there a good while, and then came to Wagner's and worked for the Matadors, and just them big. I remember when I didn't want to work here at the Sixes because I didn't think it was big enough to back then. And I was working for the Matadors, and Wagner's, had 800 sections in one block there, and so they was running 14,000 cows at that time, and the screwworms nearly ate us, you know. And there wasn't much they could do. The cattle is wild. You had to riding, hunting the worms. You'd ride up on a bunch and they'd break and run. You know that they'd cross the creek down there or something at a certain trail. You'd run down there and get set and watch them, and you could smell a case of worms in them if them cattle come across there running, and then you'd come out on the other side and find that scent and catch him. doctor them, but I spent most of my life on them 4 ranches, Matadors and J.A.'s and Wagner's and here. Worked a while. I had a little experience with this because I was a brand inspector in the 60s for the cattle raisers, and they started this screwworm program, and they sent me several times to little areas where it's like north of Lubbock farming community, and young ranchers, fellas that were farming and had cattle, and I spoke to them about what things they could do that would help them on screwworms. But people now, I don't think have got any idea what them screwworms, how bad that deal is. And I was working for the Matadors in '51, and we were branding in a 300 section pasture called Almacetus. We'd just round and brand outside, round and brand outside, round and brand. And they come out there from the management and told us we needed to stop branding and just double back and round them cattle and rope the worms out of them and doctor them because they'd got so bad. And at Wagner's, I can remember 2 or 3 times in the spring of the year when the worms would get bad, we'd be branding, and we had Herefords, and we're dehorning the steers and castrating the bulls. Well, they'd tell us, and you know, none of this information that I've read and been given says anything about how this would work, but it's what we done then. We'd quit dehorning to stop the worms and just leave the horns on them, and then we'd gather about 2,000 steers that we hadn't dehorned and dehorn them in December. But the screwworms, and we didn't quit castrating, and the old man that managed that ranch for 40 years was born in the 1890s, and he was a timer. He said, Tony Hazelwood, you know, he's a legend. And he said all the water we had on that ranch was tanks or rivers or creeks or springs, you know. There wasn't a windmill on that Wagner ranch at that time. And he claimed them bull calves will stand in them tanks and drown them worms in their bags, you know, and stuff. So, and we done that several years there. In doctoring the worms, we just, 2 men like Tom and I, would just catch horses every morning and tie worm medicine behind the saddle in tow sacks and leave out and just rope and doctor calves with screwworms and come in at dinner and rest a while and change horses and leave again. And we used 3 things mainly. We used the best lick, if you had it, was chloroform in a little can squirt can, and you could just squirt a little of that on a wound full of worms. They're just working. There's a picture there of calves with them in their mouth. I've seen them just solid, but you could just squirt a little of that in there. It killed them worms, and they just go to falling out on the ground. And then we'd had carried a jar, and it was terrible. You get it on your chaps, on your horse, on your leggings. It's called Smear 62, a black thick paste, and you could take a stick or a mesquite limb you break off and paste that over that wound after you had chloroformed it. and that would seal it. And it was the best. You could turn that thing loose, and chances are he'd be all right, you know. But the cows got them having the calves, and the calves got them in their navel and in their mouth, and it was. And I've found a lot of them, rode up on them, riding down in a little damp hole where it was a little cooler and you could hear a water, blah, blah, and you get looking and it's a calf in there and it's a solid wad of worms just working, but he's still alive. And you just had to get off and knock him in the head with a rock or something and go on, because there's nothing you could do. And people can't imagine now how it was that bad, you know. And I think it's the single biggest thing that's happened to progress the cow industry in America in my lifetime, was eradicating those screwworms.
My dad branded after worms come out. I mean, after flies come out. And there's 4 of us boys, his kids. And anyway, one of us would run the dope bucket. And it had that smear 62 in it. And that smear 62 had benzene in it. And anyway, we was kids, and we'd get it on our hands. They'd burn like some gun, get it on our face. And then my mother would, before we'd go, she'd have us wear some old ragged clothes, because we'd have it all over them. And when we took them off, she burned them because they was ruined. But we'd dope the horns and the bag and the navel of those calves we was branding. And in other words, if these worms get bred, they don't make smear 62. Franklin made it. I don't know when they still make it. But anyway, that's what I'd do if I had the brand today. When the worms were out, I'd dope them. And like Boots said, that'd pretty well keep them off of them. It'd kill the ones there and keep them off of them. I never used that chloroform like Boots talking. I heard of it, but anyway, it was back then. These cowboys prowled all summer. That's all they did, Dr. Screwworms. That's what Boots talking about. It costed no telling how much. One thing, that's the only thing they could get done. And these big ranches like Boots worked for, there wasn't no way they could get around. No way they could get around, so they lost cattle. A lot
of them died.
Yeah, and babies, cause their navel, they were probably the most that you doctored. And he was talking about those baby calves would lick those wounds, and they'd get those worms in their teeth, but they wouldn't really dig in. They got in there. I remember my dad.
There's a picture right there of that one of them, just to give you an idea how bad that looked.
Yeah, and
trying to get one out of a calf's mouth.
My dad would pick them out with a stick, you know. Wasn't much fun. But, you know, they get in humans, but I never heard of anybody. Did you?
One time, I know a boy that 2 boys had a bad car wreck there right north of the ranch where I grew up. And, I mean, broke up everything. Their names was Edward Vincent and Popcorn Walters. And they got worms in that, but the doctors allowed it. And it cleaned them things up a little and then killed them.
Yeah.
And I've heard that was actually, they let the screwworms in there, the doctor did, to help clean it up.
I remember up here at the 60 one time, I didn't, but somebody else caught an old yearling. And I guess when the brand peeled, you know, it was sort of a wound there, and the worms had got in that brand, and there's a hole that big around and that deep. I mean,
now see, there's a guy called me last week, and he's an accredited judge for the Cutting Horse Association. Draws $800 a day to judge a cutting. But he said him and a bunch of judges got to talking up in Oklahoma last week, and he told them that he thought he remember as a kid, he's in his late 60s, that they'd get in the brand when it peeled, and them other fellas telling him they didn't think that they'd get worms in where a brand peeled. And I told him, yeah, I've doctored a lot of them where that brand peels and there's a little fresh blood. They'll get worms in it, you know.
of course, they dropped those flies and planes had come over. I remember riding by
Boxes, yeah.
And so they want you to send in the latter part, send in samples where they know to drop the flies. So they'd send you some little test tubes, and the reason they did is they wanted to see the worm, but they knew that a lot of times it'd be maggots, and so they could tell. Mm-hmm. I know we had an old timer working for us, and he claimed he could tell a maggot from a screwworm, but I don't think he could. I think he just thought he could. But anyway, if you sent in worms in that test tube, then likely they'd fly over.
They had a little paper. It's made out of cardboard, about like a banana. You screw the lid off, and you could drop 2 or 3 worms in that and send it to Mission, and they would verify that it was a screwworm or something else, you know.
But so I heard Bill Heatley claimed to started that screwworm deal, sterilizing the flies. Did you ever hear that, or he took credit for it? Of course, he was a politician.
A state senator then, stationed in Paducah.
Yeah.
And he did. I know he was involved in it, but I don't know. I know that at Mission is where they
Mission,
sterilize
Texas.
them flies. And the old man I referred to that run Wagner's salon, and see, we had 14,000 cows there then, and they was all wild. A young man working for the state come out there toward the end of the screwworm thing and said, Mr. Hazelwood, we think there's a male stud fly or 2 in that Soap Creek area of Wagner's. That's a big wild country there at Wagner's. And we need you to gather those cows and spray them and to kill that fly. And Tony, we didn't have no corrals down there, and them cattle was wild. This is old Tony. He stood there a minute, kicked dirt with his foot, and his byword was by grabs. He said, by grabs, son, I can probably send them Cowboys down there and catch and cut that old stud fly easier than we can spray them cows.
Catch and cut the stud fly.
I've read this and looked at it, and then there was another sheet here. I lost it, but it showed the thing that I was most interesting to me in not knowing anything about their history is how it just takes 3 or 4 hours for that fly to lay the egg on a fresh wound to hatch, and then he's a worm. And it was on another paper that I had, and then it'd been known that a screwworm fly working on this one had been known to fly 5 or 6 miles and get on a fresh wound, you know. And
but that you could see the fly blow, couldn't you?
Yeah.
You could see where it's white stuff. Best I remember.
They'd just lay a egg in a wound, and in a matter of hours, that thing hatches and goes to eating. I think if it gets started again, I don't know if people will doctor them or concentrate on it like they used to. That was a,
But you
and
take
it killed all the 90% of the deer, wild animals, and everything. Got them and died. You know, there was very few deer in this country because screwworms killed all of them. You know.
But the thing about it is, y'all probably know the scientific or the new stuff that, like that smear 62. I'm sure they don't make it, but I don't know a solution other than just what we were doing, roping and doctoring them. If you worked one of these old big pastures and vaccinated for 30 days, then what are you going to do again?
Right.
Work it again? I mean, it's a big job. You have to have a lot of men.
Right.
And I don't know what the solution will be. Maybe y'all will find something, but I don't know what it's going to be other than just doctoring them individually. When they were bad, man, there would be thousands of bottles sent in, but this was on the end where they weren't dropping flies everywhere.
Right.
So this would be on the end where if King County had some, they'd come up here and spray them or drop flies. That was the idea.
They used to drop them boxes of sterile male flies in pasteboard box out of airplanes, and then they, and that paper says that that's the only method that's been checked and proven to be true to control them is sterilizing the male flies at that plant in Michigan and scattering them across. But that was a pretty expensive deal, I think, and I don't, and then I don't know anything about the written part of it. You know, I've doctored hundreds, day in and day out. Just ride till you give out and come in. They changed horses and go back, and we used another stuff that was pretty good, and I liked it better than I did the smear 62 because it didn't get on you and stay forever. It was clear jelly, come in jars, and I think we called it like EQ 335, and it was a thick jelly looking stuff, and it would kill the worms and protect the wound for a little while. And we used that a lot too. And
Boots, I think Martin made that.
yeah,
I think Franklin made smear 62, and I think Martin made that clear stuff.
yeah.
That's what I think.
It might have been.
I can't remember for sure.
It was a clear. We used to get it, and it was called it EQ 335, and it was like a cloudy colored jelly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like that smear 62. Boy, you got that on your rope, on your feet, on your horses, and everything. It stayed, you know, but it would seal, if you could get it pasted over a wound, it would seal it, and they had to have air to breathe, you know, and cut it off. That was what it was.
But that smear 62 would stick. And I don't remember that others. I guess it stuck, but we didn't use it much. It sort of, to me, Boots, that Martin stuff came along a good while after smear 62.
Yeah, it was. That's right. And I'll tell you something that I heard, and this has nothing to do with the screwworm, but I was at a meeting in Vernon, Texas, where we met discussing screwworms and how to control them, and an old gentleman said this, and this has been 65 years ago, and I still think of the wisdom in it, but he was a state senator, just sitting out there in the audience, named Senator Moffett. He had an office in Chillicothe and was a state senator for years and years. But the MC recognized him in the audience and said, Senator Moffett, would you like to come up and say a few words? And we're glad to have you. And I remember that old man got up and walked up there and said, well, I don't want to get up here and be like the old boy that just said a few words and sat down and left the audience wondering about the degree of his intelligence, as opposed to the guy that stays up here till he removes all doubt. I've always thought of that old man doing that, and that was in about 62 or 3 that he done it. But I know, you know, we've all been at meetings where somebody removed all doubt.
Yeah, you're glad to see him sit down, weren't you, Boots?
You know, all I know about worms was we just roped and doctored. 90% of them was roped in a pasture and tied them down. And I know stories there, like Miss Bird, later in life, were very wealthy because they had oil. But she told me during the late 40s, and they had 3 ranches, 1 at Paducah and 2 at Midland. But she told me her and her husband, his name was Free Bird, and that he had his leg broke and they didn't have any money. And she said, I was going with him horseback. We fixed him a chair where he could carry that broke leg in it. And she said, I'd have our lunch and always be sure and fix it and tie it on one side and the worm medicine on the other side. And he would rope a calf with worms, and I'd get out and waller him down and doctor him. And we'd put in a whole day like that on a ranch there. And people can't imagine doing that now, but she told me that one time. I just thought at the time she was very wealthy, had a Cadillac or 2 sitting out there in the driveway, and I thought, I can't imagine her wallering a calf down and doctoring him for screwworms, you know. But people done whatever it took, you know, to make it work. And
it cost of course, I don't know how much, but it cost the cattle industry millions and millions of dollars for years and years and years. And like I say, there's an old fellow worked here. His name was Daddy Buck. His real name Porter Myers, but
yeah,
he lived at South Camp. And they still a South Camp here, but the manager here was named George Humphreys. He is a great man. Sort of like Tony Hazelwood with Wagner's. But anyway, old Daddy Buck, like the 1st of June, he'd say, George, those worms are just eating me up. He said, I'm going to have some help. So George would send him a man down there, an old single boy. And they'd doctor. Well, the 60s, the 4th of July, they took off 4 days. Went to Stanford Rodeo, took the chuck wagon and cooked for the boys, and they'd get in the roping and all, and big deal. Well, when they're doctoring screwworms, you know, they couldn't hardly quit, but it got up nearly to July 4th, and George was out there where Daddy Buck was, and Daddy Buck says, by golly, George, they just pretty well quit not having any screwworms right now. Of course, he did that because he wanted to go to Stanford. And I don't know if George let him go or not, but that was his thinking, that they were bad, and then right before Stanford, they got a lot better. And both there'd be times when they'd be worse than others, wasn't they?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know why they did, but there'd be times when doctoring a lot of them, and then they'd let up, you know.
During the early 60s, too, when they were thinning this out and it was playing out, we had inspectors as far as 15 miles down in old Mexico watching for anything with worms that's coming this way, you know. Why, I don't know that with the things like it is now, whether Mexico would let us put a guy down there to watch for that, but they wouldn't let any cattle come closer than about 15 miles to the border if they were.
It wasn't like it was every year it was here. I guess maybe they got a little worse in some times of the summer, but I don't remember. It's just sometimes they got a little worse, and I don't know why. Do you, Boots?
I don't know. I just.
You can't run 1.5 miles, so it takes a pretty good roper, and then it takes a horse that knows how to rope on, and then it takes a lot of men. Like, how big is Croton? How many acres Croton? 15,000?
Yeah.
And that's just one pasture. Well, 3 men in there, it'd take 2 or 3 days to get around, and that's just one pasture. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah, it would be terrible if they get started. And then a lot of them I've doctored them, and then bob their tail or something, and you'd catch that thing, doctor him again, where he knocked the blood off, and anywhere there's a little blood, they'd get on it.
Like an old cancer-eyed cow. God dang. They're terrible looking anyway, but when they get screwworms in there, not very pretty.
No, I think it'll be devastating to this country, and then whether people will be as devoted as they was then to doctoring them, you know, and you got to see them cattle, all of them you can see regularly. And
long hours. I imagine Boots and probably Wagner's and J.A. did the same thing. There's grass ropes back then, wasn't no nylon.
No.
And like the supply house would buy a coil of grass ropes.
600 foot.
Yeah, and they'd cut Boots 30 foot off, because you'd wire them one out or break one, and the Cowboys couldn't afford to. So the ranches furnished them ropes, which not anymore.
All of them furnished ropes for it, and 90% of what you're doing roped calves, you just caught riding, and you could smell the calf in that bunch of cows right out there if he had worms. Try to get him picked out and just cut him out and catch him and doctor him. And
a lot of times they'd be laying around a tank, and if cattle once in a while, like Boo's talking about, and the calf would be laying there, and you couldn't really tell that he had screwworms or not, but chances are he had them in his navel, and you just get up pretty close and hooligan
catch him laying there.
Just
and another thing, and I thought this was pretty tricky, a guy at San Angelo told me, and that's a sheep country, and they nearly eat sheep, them dang screwworms. But he told me you could lay 5 or 6 55-gallon barrels that's open on one end. Just lay it down around water, and then you could slip up there later, and them sheep come into water, and any of them army lambs would crawl up in them barrels later.
Really?
He said you could slip around and set that barrel up, 4 or 5 barrels, and you might have a case of worms in every one of them. That's what a guy told me there at San Angelo years and years ago.
I'll be dang.
You could doctor them sheep that way.
Never heard of it.
They just crawl in that thing looking for a dark, cool place and crawl in that barrel and lay down. He said if you oozed up there and just run and set them barrels up, you'd have worm in every one of them, he said.
There ain't no sheep up here. You got San Angelo down there. There ain't any sheep up here.
No. No. Coyotes that eat all of them here, but I remember doctoring them for days and days and days, just rope and tie them down and doctor them, put that stuff on them, and then you'd catch one and doctor him again. You'd recognize him, you know, and know that he skinned that stuff off and worms got in that thing again, you know. And we lost a tremendous amount of cattle at Wagner's from worms. Just eat them, you know.
But them old boys put in long hours, but it's also dangerous. You know, a horse fall and you tie it on hard and get drugged to death, and it's dangerous, but usually proud to it, didn't you? That's the way we did. 2 men together.
Right, and another thing that we don't see now, but then I remember when my dad and them, they stressed use a neck rope.
Yeah.
Roping them calves if something happened, well, you'd have a chance to turn your horse around if he fell with you running hung to him or something.
But that neck rope
insisted on them to use a neck rope. Rope and out doctoring worms by yourself.
The Masterson Ranch there at Truscott, there's an old gentleman owned it, and he lived down the country somewhere, but he didn't want you roping. They had to pin everything. Well, you just can't do that. I mean, you can't get around. In other words, you rope and get back on in 20 minutes, and you might have to take an hour to pin him. So when the old man was up here, he didn't stay up here, they'd pin him. But as soon as that old man left, they went back to roping them. But it was for the benefit of the ranch, because they wasn't getting them all doctored, driving them in.
I can't imagine now. I don't know how a manager like Tony or George, when you went to bed tonight, the worms was eating some of them calves out there, and there wasn't nothing you could do about it but just try to have more calves.
Both talking about carrying it in a tow sack, but they also, a lot of cowboys are taking an old pair of boots and cut the top off right here and sew the bottom up, and then use these loops to tie. That's the most common screwworm.
Hang that on the saddle horn on the off side with something in it, you know. But
any horses have screwworms much?
No, I've seen them, in those horses, they'd get them just like cattle. They just didn't have as many places like dehorning and castrating them and stuff like that. But I've seen horses with them, gosh. There at Wagner's during the heyday of them things, see, we had 800 to 1,000 horses turned out there, and then there's none of them even. We had 250 mares, not any of them even halter broke. If you got one up and doctored her we had some high, deep chutes, and you could run one in that thing and get up on the side on a board there and try to do something to her, but when you turned her out, she was usually in worse shape than she was when you put her in there, you know, because you just couldn't do nothing to her. And you know, I can't hardly sew a button on now, but prior to this, I've sewed probably 20. We had a sliding bar above that gate up there pretty high, and one of them wild mares would jump up there and hit their head and just roll that down. And this sounds a little more like I'm embellishing it, because we didn't deaden it or do nothing, just get 2 or 3 men up there and collar and hold her sideways, and I'd sew that back up. And I bet I've sewed up 25 there. I learned if I punch a little hole in it down here at the bottom where it could drain, if that filled up and got infected, it'd slough off. But if you could keep it drained out, and I'd see one of them old mares 3 or 4 years later and say, I remember when I sewed your head back up, honey. And didn't have any And, you know, I didn't sterilize the needle or put anything on it. We just clean it up and put it back together and sew it up. But, and a lot of them worked, you know, it worked on a lot of them. But
Used to, they didn't use a vet much. I just remember, I remember the first vet came to the ranch, you know, that was unusual.
yeah, there's a guy, I was up here one time and they had a vet come from Abilene named Smith.
Dr. Smith, yeah.
Yeah, and they was gonna do something to some colts, had them down there north of the 8s in an old wire pen. I was a brand inspector and just stopped, and I know there at Wagner's, I was riding a good 8-year-old sorrel horse, cut a foot, boy, he tore it up. And I asked Tony, I said, Tony, this is really a good horse, and I'm making a living riding him. Can I take him to the vet there in Vernon and try to help? Oh, by grabs, just turn him out.
Turn him
He'll
out.
probably be all right.
That's what we did. Turn them out.
And,
Talking about Dr. Smith, if you vaccinated for anthrax, a doctor had to be there, a vet.
yeah,
I remember Dr. Smith coming from Abilene to Stonewall County. I guess he gave it, but that, you know, people can get anthrax.
yeah.
And I guess that was the reason, but
When I first went to work here, we'd have a vet. There was one down there by Monday for a while.
Dr. Stewart, yeah.
He'd come out and we had to vaccinate all them cattle. We had a Taylor cattle down there for blackleg, for anthrax.
I remember me and my brother John was kids and young, and we'd go over to Taylor camp with the 60s, and the 60s moved all the cattle out of that Taylor camp country on account of anthrax. It's a spore farm and gets in the ground for 30 years, so they say. They'd move all those cattle out, but there'd be remnants, you know. Well, that camp man would be catching remnants, and of course we wanted to do a little of that. But anyway, we made a big round and we was gonna meet at a tank, you know. Of course, we'd been out several hours and thirsty. So that camp man named Bob, but me and my brother got to the tank before he did. And the first thing we did, got off and got a drink of water. Well, he come up a little later and he said, he knew we'd drink water, but he says, you boys didn't drink any of that water out of that tank, did you? We said, yes, sir. He said, that tank's quarantined for anthrax. Well, I immediately got it. I knew I had anthrax. I'd tell trotting in. I thought, I've got it.
You know, we used to do right here, drank out of every old dirt tank that's on the side of the road from here back down. I've rode up and just get down on your belly and blow them little bugs back and drink a belly full of that water.
It won't hurt you.
Day in, day out.
It won't hurt you. If it hurts you, me and Bush both be dead.
But it'd hurt you worse if you couldn't have found it. But see, I was telling y'all a while ago, I was working for the Matadors, and that was north of Amarillo. Channing was our headquarters, and I think it was in 1950 or 51. It was branding like 200 calves a day and move every day over, because we was in a 300 section pasture called Almacetus. They sold it, bought it from the XITs, and they come out there from the office at Channing and told us to quit branding them calves and double back and round them same bunches and doctor the worms out of them. And that was about 60 miles north of Amarillo, where we'd been. So, and they were, and I don't remember them being a constant thing, but they were just eating the calves in, and they had us to quit branding and working and just start doctor. And we wouldn't riding and just hunting one, we'd just round a bunch and rope the worms out of them and doctor them, and then round another bunch. And I think that is in 1951.
I was saying a while ago that lost a lot of wildlife. Used to, this country didn't have any deer, don't you remember?
They think the screwworms killed a deer.
When I was a kid, if we saw a deer,
that was a big deal.
we'd tell her at the supper table that we saw a deer that day. And now that everything's leased out for deer hunting, you know, people come hunt deer, but
hundreds of them here, you know.
Well, years. Because when I was a kid, I don't never hardly remember seeing any, and then I was might near grown before there's many deer.
And wild hogs was the same way. Screwworms eat a lot of the wild hogs when they're born, and them little babies with that navel thing, screwworms get in that and kill all them. And so they, and now the hogs is taking us, and this is the only place I know of where 10-point bucks die of old age in the pasture.
Yeah.
They're thick here, you know.
They don't hunt them much.
But I don't. And you know, I'm 94 years old and been punching cows for a living since 49, and I've been in them I've never killed a deer.
Really?
I have never had the desire to shoot one, you know.
I'll kill one deer at Alpine, but I'm just like Boots. They're too pretty to shoot. I'm just not much hunter. I don't want to kill anything.